Check. wonder, but what can I do? Working hard on the other side of the world, might as well be on the moon. All right, welcome to Cmsc 355. Hope you are doing great. We're going to go ahead and get started for today. Let me put that Minty link. We're going to be using Minty today, of course. Let me put that in the chat so you can go ahead and get logged in. If you're not, of course, you can always use the code 13326071 is today's code. Today we are talking about today we're talking about user stories, or kind of how we keep track of our work. Okay, that's what we're going to focus on today. But first, a few announcements. For instance, there is a assignment due tonight. As you know, it is super simple in theory, maybe not in practice, but in theory. You have to have a commit from you and your teammate uploaded, and you have to have proof of that submitted by tonight. It's really tomorrow at 3 a.m., but you know, tonight basically. Next week we will be working more with Xfig, so if you're still having problems with Xfig, make it happen, get it installed and get it compiling, because you will continue to unfortunately lose points if you don't have that up and running. All right, so a lot of people I noticed are having trouble with Git authentication. Couple tips there. If you're having trouble with Git authentication, one thing you could try is you could try to use GitHub Desktop first and make sure you can use that properly. That's just a client that you know is going to work with GitHub, right? It's made by GitHub. It's almost certainly going to work with GitHub. So make sure that it works with that. And then if you can get that working, maybe you can go back to source tree or just regular. You can also use the SSH key. That's not too hard to create and stuff. That's one way to do it. That's probably how most developers do it. Or you can use the OAuth way through the browser. So if you're still having trouble with that, though, please continue to make it work. This is something that you will need to do. As Spruce Wood said, he or she brings up a very good point, that the HTTPS repo accessing is being depreciated probably soon. So, you would want to use a SSH key to go ahead and access that. So that's something you might want to do. There's a gajillion tutorials on how to do that. It's just a number of steps that you need to follow. If we have time, maybe next week I'll do a tutorial on it or something, but that's something that, my tutorial is going to be the same as everybody else's tutorial. So I don't see a lot of value for y'all for me to also do a tutorial on it. Just Google SSH tutorial, source tree or GitHub or whatever. And, okay. So another thing that I noticed is there's a few regrade requests in Gradescope. First of all, nice work, y'all. I appreciate that you are using the regrade request feature in GitHub instead of slacking me, or worse yet, emailing me. That would make my head explode. But make sure when you do that you submit a regrade request and then communicate with the TA using Slack and ask them, hey, can you please regrade this for whatever. There seems to be some chatter in the chat about what is due tonight. It's right there on Gradescope, but remember, it is a repository that you and your partner have created. It is where you're going to put your Android assignment eventually. So it's a new repository, not the one related to what we did in class. It's a new repository that only you and your teammate are committing to, and okay, that's what it is. So just to clarify. I think that's it for announcements. Okay, that's it for announcements. Now we're going to go ahead and talk a little bit about software engineering. we're going to try and first to think just a little about why do software projects fail? There are lots of reasons. Let me get out my little handy dandy drawer. There are lots of reasons that software projects fail. One of the reasons that's obvious is they don't do what customers want. So even if they're completed successfully, they may not be considered a success because they don't really do what customers want. They may also be super late or over budget. They can definitely be hard to maintain and evolve, or they can be all of these things. The kind of the most common one is probably that they are late or over budget. And another common one, of course, is that they don't actually do what the customers want. Okay? Now, we're going to think about today, how does Agile try and avoid this fate? Let's think about that. One of the things that Agile kind of emphasizes is that it works continuously with stakeholders to develop requirements and to test those requirements. So it keeps the client in the loop constantly, so that at the very least, you're gonna build something that the stakeholder wants, right? Because they're gonna be getting a demo once every sprint. They're gonna be helping you very closely to refine the requirements and things like that. One of the key features, all right, so let me get out my pen again so I can circle a few things. Key features here that I want to point out. We are working closely with stakeholders. Now, one question with this. Do you think that we talk, like let's say we're building a piece of software for a client. Do we talk to everybody that works for that client? What do you think we do to get things out of that client? Give me an answer in the chat. How do you think we interact with a client? Do we talk to the whole company? What do we do? Hello in the chat. What do we do when we want to talk to a client? We email them. Come on, y'all. Trying to push me over the edge. That's funny. Give them a document that can be answered. Okay, I'm not talking about what, so I'm not talking about how we talk to them, like what format we use. I'm talking about, do we talk to all of them or do we talk to one of them? No, we just talk to usually one of them, and they represent the needs of that client. So we're usually talking to somebody that is going to help us refine the requirements that we get. Okay. Now, another key feature is we maintain a working prototype. Okay. Maintain a working prototype. All right, so I'm going back just to the questions in the chat real quick. It's not actually a boss. We just talk to somebody that is responsible for communicating the vision that the client has. Okay. And that person is kind of representing the client's needs. They help us refine things, refine our requirements. Whatever that person says that they want is kind of, what we're going to end up building. So it's important that that person has a good picture of what the client wants. It's not a Scrum Master, though, by the way. It's not a Scrum Master. Scrum Master is in charge of the local team of developers. This is somebody outside of the team. Yes, you might also call this a product owner. That's kind of the Scrum name to call this person. Thank you. That's a good point. Okay, so another thing is we build working prototypes. So, for instance, one of the very first deliverables will be the version 0.1 of your idea. Can it just be something that doesn't do anything? No, it must be a working prototype, even if it just puts up a splash screen and that's it. It has to do something. It can't be broken. It always has to work. You have to have something you can demo to the client every time. That is a key to this approach. And guess what? Every 1 or 2 weeks, you're going to be demoing this software. So you can't like totally break it in the meantime. You can't just make one version that works and then totally break it for 6 months and then make another version that works. No, it has to work every 2 weeks. When you demo it to the client, it has to work. So those are a couple key features that I want to point out. And all right, so one of the things we call this process of getting requirements from usually 1 to 2 week sprints is what we do. 2 week sprints would definitely be better. One is a little short. The process of getting requirements from users is called essentially requirements engineering. And this has the common problem of miscommunication. You misunderstand what they want, and so you end up building the wrong thing. They miscommunicate what they want, so you end up building the wrong thing. Behavior-driven design or behavior-driven development is a specific method for tying requirements to testing. And so that's one way you can help mitigate this risk, but just know that communication of requirements is a big problem and it is tricky. That's one of the reasons why we have demos all the time, because usually when somebody sees something and it's not what they expected, they will point that out. And that's why we meet with them, a product owner, quite often to refine what we're going to do, because once they understand better what we're doing, then they can help shape what we do in the future. Now, one of the most important ways that we can express requirements is as a user story. Okay, user story. This is important. User stories. You're going to need to write user stories on test, in your sleep, at the job, everywhere. User stories are how we're going to describe what we're going to do. These things are just lightweight descriptions of how the app is going to be used. They concentrate on the behavior of the app, not really the implementation. Okay, so we do not mention implementation. I don't care how you're going to implement it. That is not going to be on a user story. And we may break these user stories into implementable tasks later. So you can break them down further later on. All right, so let's see, what does a user story look like? And again, this is how we're going to specify what we want our software to do. Fortunately, like they're relatively straightforward. They're just going to use regular English, and it's going to be something that could fit potentially on an index card. So here is a great way to format it. There's many ways to do it. Of course, you can make a title, but this is what I want you to remember right here. Everybody see this? If you're taking notes, this is what you need to know right here. This is how you are going to phrase your user stories for this class, and hopefully when you go out there, for your actual job. So as a blank, so that I can do blank, I want to do something. For instance, here is an example one on the card. As a movie fan, so that I can share a movie with other fans, I want to add a movie to the Rotten Potatoes database. Okay? You understand what you want to do because you've created this little itty bitty story, and it's something that anybody can understand, both clients and developers. It has nothing to do with the implementation. In fact, I would argue that this use of the word database is not great. They should probably not have used database. They should have said, I want to add a movie to the website Rotten Potatoes. All right. So that's what a user story looks like. Let's look at a few examples. So if I want to, let's say the one has a title, see which of my friends are going to a show as a theater goer so that I can enjoy the show with my friends. I want to see which of my Facebook friends are attending a given show. Okay. Do you understand what that might look like? Does everybody understand what that might look like as a finally implemented thing? And maybe describe what would that look like in the chat. How do you think that might show up, in Facebook, if that was in Facebook? Can anybody describe what that might look like if it were to be implemented in the Facebook app? I don't know if y'all do Facebook, but imagine that you did. Let me know in the chat, what do you think that might look like? A notification could be, absolutely. A section that it shows you which of your friends have already responded to an event. A poll, yep. You can see which friends are at a said show in real time. A list of friends attending the event. A post in the news feed. The point is, these are all valid things that this user story could be implemented as. So I wanted to kind of point out the difference between the user story and then how it's implemented, okay? The user story is kind of what you want to do. Now, how it's implemented, that is a more specific thing that you're going to need to work out and talk to your team to figure out how you want to implement it. But that's up to you. All right, here's another example of a user story. Show patrons Facebook friends is the name of the story. So as a box office manager, so that I can induce a patron to buy a ticket, I want to show her or him which of her Facebook friends are going to a given show. Okay, so it just describes who wants to do it, kind of why they want to do it, and what they want. Very simple way, but a pretty good way of specifying what you want to do. This user story should not be technical. That's absolutely right, Cass. It is something that you would hope a client could come up with. It's your job later on to make it technical, but it should not be technical. Okay, so let's say you were actually going to get your user stories from a client. A great way to do that is using, physical cards. It's a very non-threatening way to do it. Everybody can write on cards. It's easy to rearrange them. And because these stories must be short, it's easy to change as you kind of get more insights, okay? This is just a kind of an easy way to do it in a, like offline kind of way if you want to all, at the start of your project, get together and make some cards. It's a great way to kind of work together. Of course, if you're doing this like, in a very small group or like by yourself, you maybe don't need to do this. But if you're doing this of a group of even two, instead of huddling around a computer together, which kind of forces us to think and like, forces us to type and interact with the computer and waste a lot of effort, mental effort on that, it's always kind of interesting to do it on a physical medium, like just like you would on a whiteboard or something. It just gets you thinking outside of your computer. So something to consider when you start making requirements for your project. All right, so the way that real projects are organized is they have what is called a project backlog. That is the list of user stories that have not been implemented. So these, real systems have hundreds of user stories, if not thousands, that haven't been implemented yet. And the backlog is the ones that haven't been completed yet. The backlog is actually organized. So, for instance, It's organized as in 1, 2, 3, 4, dot, 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 100. Okay? The most important things are up here at the top. The most important tasks are up here at the top. The least important ones are down here at the bottom. If you need to choose new work, you always start up here at the top. You choose task off the top. That's where you get your task. Okay? That is how a backlog works. You have hundreds and hundreds of stories at any given time. You make sure that list is always prioritized. And then if you need to do more work, if you have time to do more work, you take things off of the top. All right, so there are a bunch of ways and approaches to organizing user stories. There are boards like this. You can, if you want to do physical boards, you can have a to-do list, which of course is organized again, the most important at the top, the least important at the bottom. Another thing that you can do is once you start doing it, put it in the doing thing, and once it's done, put it in the done bin. GitHub itself offers something like this called the project board, and you can organize your task in very much this way if you'd like to. All right, so we talked a lot about requirements and things like that. I want to take a second to, since we're doing this remotely, to make sure that you don't have any questions so far. So do you have any questions so far on the topic that we are discussing? Any questions so far? Put them in Menti. I'll give you just a second to think and or vote on questions. Somebody's asking, is it a physical board that displays as info or a virtual board? That's a great question. Can be either. You can have a physical board like a whiteboard or a tack board, or you can have a virtual board. For the purpose of this class, I would encourage you to have a virtual one like the one that's available, the project boards that are available on GitHub, because then you can share back and forth without going to the same place. Good question. Somebody's asking, can we swap the so that and I want to for the user stories? Sure. If the ordering really gets to you, you can swap them. It's not a big deal. It's all about the content there. So go for it. Not a big deal in that sense. Every 2 weeks, when you build a working prototype, is this prototype given to a few testers or is it implemented to the entire system? Okay. So this is kind of a very specific question. So I'm going to try and answer it like in the case of your specific project. For your project, when the Android project, when you build a working prototype every 2 weeks, that prototype is your entire app. And you should, of course, give it to a few testers every time. Now, I think also you're kind of getting at like, what does Facebook do? When they build a new prototype, do they automatically give it to everybody, the new version? No, of course, they test it on a few people first and make sure it's working, and then they roll it out to everybody. Great question. All right, great questions. Oh, somebody's asking, what if you don't have a deliverable after a sprint because it took longer than you expected to complete? Just move on to the next sprint? No. What you do, if you just demo something, even if it's the same as your last demo, you just show, hey, it's still working. If you don't have anything to demo, that means your software is broken, and that is absolutely unacceptable. It has to always be working at the end of a sprint. Even if you don't have anything new to show, you just show, hey, I've made progress on new stuff. The old features are still working. I haven't broken them. Here is what I have right now. Hope that answers that question. Good question. That's kind of a tricky one. All right. So now we want to talk about smart stories. Okay. One thing I want to show you is one of my favorite Twitter feeds. Apologize for the potty words, but you all should check out this user story feed, because I can guarantee that some of y'all are going to write some user stories that I may be tempted to put here. So this this particular account makes fun of user stories, and it says user stories that, of course, nobody would ever want to do. For instance, like, as a job seeker, I want 10 years of experience in a 5-year-old technology so that I can be a rock star. Obviously, that's impossible. Some of these are more illustrative than others. Like, for instance, a bad user story would be, as a user, I want to become active daily so that the OKR reaches the 70% threshold, and the OKR being some internal metric that users do not care about. Okay? So this is just a funny way to see what is not good user stories. And in contrast, you can then decide, hey, what is a good user story, by making sure yours do not look like these. And we're going to talk about how to make good user stories as well. All right, so user stories should be smart, specific, measurable, achievable, ideally implementable in one iteration. They should be relevant to the goals of the project and time boxed. Okay, smart. Smart, just like SMART goals. Specific and measurable implies that when you have an input, there can be some expected results. For instance, while we, of course, want our projects to be user-friendly, this is not a user story. Okay? This is not a user story. You can't just create a story that says the UI should be user-friendly, because that is not specific enough, and we can't really test that. So one of the things that I really prefer to do with task or user stories is to make sure they're achievable, ideally in one sprint, because then you can demo them at the end of one sprint. This is similar to the point that one of y'all brought up just before. You can't deliver it in one sprint, then chop it up into smaller pieces so you can deliver it in one sprint, and then you can demo it. That is a good way to go. It, of course, needs to be relevant, because we are, ultimately trying to build something that meets a user's need. Okay? So it has to have kind of business value or utility to the customer. And unfortunately, you may have gotten into software engineering because you hate money, or you hate dealing with money or something. Unfortunately, though, that is a little bit of a naive thing, right? Because you need to deduce whether these user stories actually do something that has business value. The easiest one for us to stomach is making the product remarkable or amazing. But things like managing the cost, increasing the revenue, and protecting the revenue are super important. And you're going to have to learn not to think totally like an MBA person, but you're going to have to think a little bit about the business behind things, because you're going to have to decide which stories are important. In fact, I want to bring up one person that I'm thinking of, one of my best buddies from Raleigh, North Carolina, when I was there. He is I forget what he's called, a master software developer at his company, meaning like he's one of the highest software developers in his company. He's gotten there not only because of his technical skill, which is quite good, of course, but because he is willing to be the one to understand what gives us business value and what is business value, and help to make sure we're working on the right things. So your technical skill matter a lot, but also your ability to interface with business people and to understand the business side of things. Guess what? Business is easier than computer science. So you should not be afraid of business. It's really relatively easy. If you're able to understand computer science, I can almost guarantee you that you can understand business, or at least the basics of business. And so you should not be scared of it. Somebody's asking, when building software, is the cost solely the time that developers take to code the project? When building software, I guess that's the cost of building it. But yes, you definitely take into account, the hardware that it has to run on and things like that when you're selling it to a customer. All right. Another thing is you have to always time box a user story so that it doesn't get out of hand. If you have one user story that, for instance, let's say you've noticed that Joe has been working on the same user story for 3 or 4 weeks on end now, and he's not made progress, that is going to be a problem eventually because he should have been working on other things and getting them done. And if he's getting stuck indefinitely, that's a problem. So you definitely want to time box your efforts on these user stories. Okay. What I want y'all to do now, we've talked about user stories, making them smart. I want y'all to try and write some user stories about anything. So write your user stories here. Here's a good example of one. I'll let everybody go ahead and have a minute to write some user stories. There's over 60 of you on the stream now, so I expect, quite a few here. And I'm willing to wait here as long as necessary. So write your user stories here. I'm going to shut up for a minute and let you get to it. I'll even play you some tunes while you're doing it.
Face to face, person to person, one to one, just you and me. Person to person, but can't replace, no. Person to person, that's just how it gets done.
These are good so far. Keep them coming. I think I see enough to discuss. Let me discuss a few here. For instance, so come on back, even if you haven't had a chance to post, let's just look at a few together here. This is a good one. It's a good one. Follows the format for sure. But can anybody think of one thing that could be changed a little bit here? So as a squirrel, so that I can let others know where my nuts are, I want to post to a squirrel feed. Who can think of one thing I might say about this user story? Let me know in the chat. What do you think? Close, close. Guang Li, thank you for the answer. That is almost exactly what I'm looking for, but I would say, yeah, similar to what Cass is saying, is that it's actually a little too specific, right? It's too solution oriented. uh yeah, so maybe another good point is that the squirrel is maybe too specific of a person. Maybe I could see that. Maybe everybody wants to know where the nuts are. But what I'm was thinking is that the squirrel feed is too specific. You're basically getting into implementation there. So you're telling the person what to do. So something like, as a squirrel, so that I can let others know where my nuts are, I want to share the location of all of the nuts that I've buried, right? So that might be better because you're not saying I want it to be on something very specific like a squirrel feed, but I'm just saying kind of what I want it to do. So remember, try not to get into implementations. Let's see. All right, as a video game enthusiast, so I can find more video games, I want to be given recommendation based on the games I already own. Can anybody think of anything that you would improve on this one? Let me know in the chat if you can. If you can't, it's okay to say no. I don't think it can be. Let me know in the chat how you might change this one. Okay, so yeah, I mean, so maybe you might want to say what framework or what app or platform you're in, but presumably you're making this user story in the context of some team, right? I think this one is actually really good because it's, as a video game enthusiast, I want to find more video games. I understand what they want so that I can find more video games. I want to be given recommendations based on the games I already know. That's, totally clear, but not a specific. It doesn't tell me how to show the recommendations. It doesn't say I want a recommendations feed. It just says kind of what I want. All right. So, what do y'all think about this one? What would you change about this one? As a chef, so that I can prevent my house from burning down, I want to have a fire extinguisher. Who can let me know in the chat? What would you change about this one? Yep, too solution oriented. Excellent. I think y'all are starting to pick up on the things here. That was too solution oriented. And I think again, this is as a plane so that I can fly faster, I want to decrease my weight. Maybe this is okay actually, and this is interesting because we get into some of the really details of things. So this is solution oriented in a way. I want to decrease my weight so that I can fly faster, but it doesn't say how to decrease my weight. And so I would actually say this one's okay because it's not so constrained. All right, great user stories, y'all. Y'all are off to a good start. Now I want to talk a little bit about, once you have these user stories, what do you do to figure out when you're done with these user stories? Well, you use these things called acceptance tests. And these are basically tests that hopefully can try and find out whether we have met that user story, okay? So, it's basically what shows us that the customer accepts your application, or the fact that your application does that particular thing, by running this test either manually or through a unit test, something like that. So one of the things we like to do is actually map user stories directly to acceptance tests. And of course, if these are automatable, that's even better. But in general, for every user story, we want to have an acceptance test, okay? So, we have a story that we've defined, and then we want to have a test that tests that story is actually working in our software. Now, this is interesting because it might require you, put my pen back on, to make your user stories a little bit smaller, okay? So you might have to make your user stories a little bit smaller than what we've talked about before if you want to make them easier to test. Just might have to make them a little bit smaller because it is hard to write unit tests for really big ideas, but it is really easy to write test and acceptance test for smaller ideas. All right. So here we're gonna talk a little bit about scenarios, and we're gonna map user stories to testable scenarios. So, like for instance, for a single user story, you might have several testable scenarios, and if all of those scenarios pass, then your user story is considered accepted, right? So, for instance, we can specify these by using the given, when, and then format. So given some starting position, when I do something, then some other things happen. Super simple, just like the way we do user stories, but this is a good way to kind of specify test as a scenario. All right, so we typically have a user story and it maps kind of to a feature, and then we want to have a scenario that tests that user story. So one thing I want to point out is that scenarios are typically 3 to 8 steps. A few things happen, and we can often do happy path and sad path scenarios. So happy path is where things go exactly like you want them to. The user doesn't make any mistakes. Everything's great. And sad path is when the user does make mistakes, but we have stuff that corrects them and puts them back on track. All right, so let's look at an example scenario. Here is the feature, or basically the title of the card, right? The user can manually add a movie. We're going to create a scenario, like a happy path scenario, which is add a movie. Remember, there could be multiple scenarios per feature. Here is the scenario. Given I'm on the Rotten Potatoes homepage, when I follow add new movie, then I should be on the create new movie page, and I fill in the title with Men in Black, select the PG-13 from rating, and press save changes. Then I should be on the Rotten Potatoes homepage, and I should see Men in Black. All right, everything went right. This is the happy path. This is one scenario. You would then need to maybe have a couple other scenarios where somebody did something wrong, and the scenario tested that the right things happened when something went wrong, like if you put bad input into the field for Men in Black or something. But this is an example of a happy path scenario. All right, so what did we talk about today? We talked about user stories as the means for capturing requirements in agile processes. Behavior-driven design is basically we capture these requirements in user stories, we put them in our sprint, and then we prioritize them and then execute them. We get a certain number done in a given sprint, and then we demo those at the end of the sprint. To test user stories, we're going to use what are called scenarios. And these scenarios, there can be one user story with several different scenarios, but each user story should probably have one or more scenarios. There's a question that says, are we going to be writing user stories, acceptance tests, and good and bad scenarios for our app? Yes, absolutely, you will be doing that. That is definitely going to be part of this class. That's why we're going over it. Great question. That is something we are going to be doing. We are going to definitely write user stories. So a follow-up question was, if so, will that all be done in GitHub? So writing user stories can and will be done in GitHub. We'll be using project boards. Acceptance test with good and bad paths. We'll see what the actions in GitHub allow us to do. We're going to start looking at things like automated builds and things like that. I'm honestly not sure right now what GitHub does allow us to do in terms of testing of Android apps on its server. So we're going to have to look into that. But assuming it does, then we would do all of that on GitHub as well as on our local machines. Great questions. Okay, so that is the end of the presentation for today. Let me go back to the question slide. I want to make sure y'all have all of your questions answered for today in case you are still stuck on something. So that's the official end of class for today. If you have questions, I'm going to stick around for the remaining 4 minutes of class and answer them. Otherwise, feel free to jet. Thank you for joining me today. That's the end of class, unless you have questions, in which case I will stick around for just the next 4 minutes to answer any questions you have. So for those of you that don't need me, get out of here. For those of you that would like to ask me a question, feel free to stick around and ask me questions. All right. Somebody's asking, one person on each team will have no submittal for the commit assignment, right? One person does the submittal for both. That is correct. However, make sure you do a group, submission where you add the other person to your submission. So it's called a group submission. You have to make sure you add that second person to your submission. If your teammate is doing the submission for you, you better make sure that they do it, and you better make sure that they add your name to the assignment. Great question. Good user story. As a well-cultured individual, I want to own a boat, so I can assert dominance when Richmond floods. Definitely entertaining. Definitely entertaining user story. Hard to imagine that as a real user story because it's a little bit off topic, but definitely an entertaining one. User story. This one's probably going to be sexist, I can tell from the beginning. As a housewife, so that I must make sure I have plenty of vegetable, I want my family to enjoy variety of food every day. Okay, so let's change this to as a house person, because both men and women can do the cooking these days, as you may know. I would say, as a house person, so that my family is healthy, I want to serve vegetables every day or something like that. And that may be too specific, too, because it's leaning a little bit too much on the implementation. All right, and this question is, so a bad scenario for the rotten potatoes one would be something like user forgets to save changes. Or it could be anything that could go wrong, site crashes, etc. Let's do this. A bad scenario for the rotten potatoes page would be something like the user puts in some bad characters into the title of the movie. Like, let's say they try and put like, I don't know what, some escape characters in there that you don't want to allow. And then your form tells them, hey, that's not allowed. However, like you say, if they forget to save changes and they go back to the main site and they're like, hey, where are my changes? That could be a bad path, but that's just a more advanced one. And you could, of course, let them know what went wrong then. So that's a good one. So as a teacher, so that I don't receive emails, I want to tell my students to use Slack. Sounds like a completely reasonable one. I might change this to, I want my students to use another means of communication, a asynchronous means of communication or something. However, I would also change this as a teacher so that my students learn to work in a professional way. I want my students to use Slack. All right, here's another question. This is my favorite class so far. Can we have more like this? LOL. Absolutely. I'm going to be here hopefully for the rest of my life. If I get tenure, I'm up for tenure this year. So I'm glad this is your favorite Friday class, and I hope we do have more like it. Here's another question. Both my partner and I already submitted our own Android commit screenshots. Is there something we should do about it now? Nope. That's fine. Don't worry about it. That's totally fine. Next time, of course, submit just one, but don't worry about it now. You'll both get a grade this way. That's fine. All right, somebody else is saying, can we use source tree for the assignment tonight? Absolutely, you can use source tree for the, why am I having trouble with that? You can use source tree for the assignment tonight, absolutely. Sure. You can also use GitHub Desktop or any Git client that you prefer. Somebody's asking, is it okay that we haven't officially made a decision on our app idea yet? Yes, it's okay. You probably have, just a little bit more time to make your final decision. Absolutely. Somebody's asking, if we have an app idea and you think it will be too hard or too easy, will you let us know? Yes, that will be part of the process. Usually we can, for most app ideas, unless they're absolutely bonkers, we can adjust them so that with the same basic idea, we can adjust them to be the right amount of hard, so that you can finish in a semester.
Gotta keep it. I gotta get next.
All right, I think we're done. See y'all later. Have a great Friday.